All right, today we're going to walk through a really unique market analysis system. It's called Market DNA, and we're going to break down how it works by looking at a specific case study on the S&P 500. So let's just dive right in.
So, what is market DNA, really? Well, at its heart, it's described as a proprietary geometric system. It's all about analyzing the market. And the whole idea here is that it gives you a completely different lens to view market structure.
Now, before we jump into the case study itself, we kind of have to understand the ground rules of this system. And the very first thing to get your head around is what it doesn't use. And this is where market DNA really goes its own way. It basically starts by throwing out almost every tool a typical analyst or trader would have in their toolkit. So we're talking no technical analysis, no fundamental analysis, forget about quantitative indicators, and yeah, even the really common stuff like Fibonacci ratios or Elliott waves, they're not part of this. Even basic things like chart patterns and trend lines are completely off the table.
So if it's not using any of those traditional tools, what's left? Well, the whole system is actually built on just 5 core geometric components. These are the building blocks you're going to see applied to the charts. We've got 3 different triangles, triangle 1, 2, and 3. Then there's something called the trapezoid, and finally, the mirror delay line. Now, let's see how these actually get put into practice.
Okay, here we go. The main event, the S&P 500 case study. We're kicking things off with Phase 1, which is all about the initial entry setup. And for this specific analysis, the documentation starts on January 18th, 2026.
So this chart here shows that initial setup for Phase 1. Right from the get-go, the system identifies 2 specific entry points. You can see the primary entry, which is labeled M, and then there's a secondary entry level right below it labeled PC. And just look at how precise these levels are. The system isn't just giving you a general zone to watch. No, it's pinpointing that primary entry M at exactly 6,872.96. And that optional secondary entry, PC, is just as specific, set at 6,820.14. These 2 numbers, they're really the foundation for the entire plan that follows. So once those entry points are defined, the very next step is to map out all the potential risk and reward. What's so important to understand here is that this whole plan is laid out before the market even makes its next move.
So how is the risk managed in this system? Well, it works with a set of parameters that are all defined ahead of time. It starts with a hypothetical $100,000 in capital and a really strict 5% max drawdown. Can't lose more than that. Then it brings in its own unique metrics, things like a trapezoid time duration of 24 days and a risk coefficient. All of these variables get crunched together to figure out a very, very specific trade size for each entry.
And the source material is extremely clear about how this calculation is made. It's a purely mechanical process, not a judgment call. In fact, it states, and I'm going to quote this directly for you, both trade sizes are calculated using the hypothetical capital, the investor's maximum allowed drawdown, the third triangle domain percentage, the risk coefficient, and the contract size. All of this planning leads to 2 possible outcomes. Scenario 1 is pretty straightforward. If the price only hits that primary entry M, the plan is targeting a profit of just over $1,000. But scenario 2, that's where things get a little more interesting. If the price actually dips further and hits that secondary entry PC, a second position is added, and this could potentially double the profit and the overall return on the whole set.
So the plan is locked in. The numbers are set. The big question, of course, is what did the market actually do next?
And that brings us from planning to pure observation. Phase 2 gets triggered by an event the system calls a mirror contact. Let's take a look at what that actually means on the chart.
And here it is. This is the chart from just 5 days later, on January 23rd. As you can see, the price has definitely moved, and it made contact with that geometric component labeled the delayed mirror. This contact point happens right at a price of $6,931. So, let's just quickly recap the sequence of events so far. First, the market dipped down. It hit that secondary entry P, which, as we know, activated scenario 2. From that point, it completely reversed and started to climb, all the way up until it made contact with the delayed mirror. And that exact contact point is what officially completes Phase 2 of this documented cycle.
So that brings us to the end of this particular documented sequence. Let's do a quick summary of where things are, and then cover some really important disclaimers that come with this type of analysis.
Now, the analysis at this stage doesn't offer any kind of prediction. Instead, it wraps up with a very simple statement. It just says we are navigating the market to see what happens next. So the focus here is clearly on documenting a process as it happens, not trying to forecast the future.
And finally, and this is absolutely crucial,
We have to cover the disclaimers that go along with this documentation. The source is crystal clear. This is not financial advice. The system also strictly prohibits using leverage above 10, and it warns you not to invest essential personal funds. The entire reason for this analysis is for public documentation and verification of a model. That's it. And it says anyone following along must stick to the provided risk management instructions, no exceptions. And that's our look into the market DNA system as it was applied in this S&P 500 case study.